in front of you. Okay, so welcome for West Bristol Climate Action on the eve of Clean Air Day 2023, which will be tomorrow, Thursday, June the 15th. The presentation is about sharing our understanding of what air pollution is generally and in the city. We want to encourage people to take individual action and positive or possibly collective action. Our first speaker is Jo Barnes, who is an associate professor from the University of West of England, and she works within the Air Quality Management Resource Centre. She has 18 years of experience, and she's particularly interested in urban air pollution, so that's very appropriate for us. She's interested in the health and environmental justice aspects of these issues and in influencing policy. So thanks very much for coming. So, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me here to speak to you today. In the week of Clean Air Day, it's a very important topic, as Tim said. So I'll quickly move on. What I'm going to do today is just give you a very quick overview, really, of air pollution. So I know that there are people in the audience who have a little bit of an understanding of air pollution, having worked in the area for some time, but there will be other people who perhaps don't know so much about it. So I've assumed no knowledge, and we'll progress on that basis. So, okay. There we go. So I expect, I don't know, we've got a little bit of corruption here on the picture here, but unfortunately, it's coming up on the screen okay, so the recording will be fine. So the news has been really busy lately with air pollution in America. And I expect you've seen pictures of like this on your TV and in your newspapers. The wildfires in Canada are causing a real problem in places like New York, as you can see here. Air pollution here is a really visible problem. And you're probably also familiar with situations like this. So this is Delhi, and air pollution here is a problem year round, every year. So it's not just when you have wildfires in Canada, they have crop burning on an annual basis, waste burning, vehicles, all sorts going on here. So a lot in industry and all sorts of things are happening at the same time and causing air pollution all at the same time. But the case in Delhi and the case in New York before, you can see it was a really visible problem. And as Tim was saying, we used to have a visible problem with air pollution here in the UK too. However, as you can see, nice pictures of Bristol, apart from the old steam train down by the docks, we don't really have much of a visible pollution problem here in Bristol. However, we do have lots of sources of air pollution, and if I start with just natural sources of air pollution, not just forest fires and wildfires, but also dust storms can cause widespread air pollution problems. Volcanoes, for those with longer memories will remember the Iceland volcano with a really long name that I'm not going to even try and pronounce, that shut down airspace over most of Europe for some time. And if trees produce volatile organic compounds, which are part of the chemical process for producing ground level ozone. So we have lots of natural sources of air pollution, which unfortunately we can't do very much about. And I certainly don't advocate cutting down trees to reduce VOCs, but we do have lots of anthropogenic or man-made sources, human sources of air pollution too. So road traffic is one of the biggest problems in our urban areas. And we're also starting to see a real increase in domestic solid fuel burning, wood burning as well. But we have other sources as well, so industry, power generation, shipping, quarries and agriculture all contribute to the air pollution that we all experience, because this air pollution doesn't just stay where it's released, it moves around. When we think about air pollution, we're generally thinking about gaseous pollutants such as nitrogen dioxide. That's the component part of nitrogen oxides. You might have heard of NOx. sulfur dioxide, you've probably also heard of, and ground level ozone as well. Some of the key gaseous air pollutants that you'll come across, but there are others. And also particulate matter. So gaseous pollutants like NO2, and then particulate matter, which is basically very fine microscopic dust, essentially. And we generally characterize particulate matter, that very fine dust, by its size fraction, how wide it is at its diameter, how wide is it at its narrowest point. And we measure it using micrometers. So we call it sort of PM10. It has a diameter of 10 microns, 10 micrometers. And that is very small. As you can see here, we've got a piece of human hair and a piece of beach sand. And you can see you can fit 5, 6, 7 particulate matter PM10 particles across the breadth of a piece of hair. PM2.5 is an even smaller particle, as you can imagine. It's a quarter of the size of a PM10 in terms of diameter. And so the reason why we're interested in this particular size fraction of particulate matter is because that size is respirable. We can breathe it in. So we've recognised that we do have an air pollution problem in Bristol for quite some time. Back in 2001, the City Council declared an air quality management area for exceedances of nitrogen dioxide, as just mentioned, the gaseous pollutant, and particulate matter, PM10. And both of these pollutants were associated with road traffic. So declared it in 2001, and then 2003, and then 2008, and then in 2011, it grew and it grew and it grew. So the reason it was growing was because the council were identifying through the monitoring they were doing that there was more and more places that were exceeding these thresholds that we'll talk about in a minute. But why are we interested? Why do we care about air pollution? It's there, but why does it matter? Well, on a really local level, we can see the health impacts are really quite stark. Every year, around 300 people in Bristol are dying early as a result of exposure to particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide. If you look at the UK as a whole, we're looking at 28,000 to 36,000 people every year dying early as a result of exposure to this pollution. In Bristol, that 300 deaths is around 8.5% of deaths that are associated with exposure to air pollution. And the cost of that to the NHS is significant, 83 million each year. So premature deaths, early deaths is one impact of air pollution, but actually air pollution is much, much more insidious in the way that it impacts on our health. So you can see some of the pollutants here associated with different health impacts. And one of the first things you can see is that the health impacts are felt throughout our bodies. So nitrogen dioxide, for instance, will have impacts on lungs, causing breathing difficulties, asthma, for instance, and reduced lung function. Whereas particulate matter, because it's that fine dust, it can actually cross over the blood-gas exchange, get into our blood system and move throughout our bodies. And once it's in the blood system, moving throughout our bodies, it can impact on all of the organs in our body. And that's why you see such a wide range of impacts associated with air pollution. So here we've got things like cardiovascular disease. That's one of the biggest impacts of air pollution. But also we've got COPD and lung cancer on there as well. So lots of different impacts. And actually, there is new evidence coming out all the time. The new research has identified that there is emerging evidence of association between air pollution and even diabetes and neurological development in children, psychiatric disorders, dementia, Parkinson's, the list goes on. And it's this growing body of evidence that suggests to us that actually the burden of disease is probably underestimated. And the effects of air pollution are felt differently depending on which stage of life you're in. So for pregnant women exposed to air pollution, the result of that can be early births and low birth weights. For children who are physically closer to the air pollution, being shorter, and having narrower airways, more susceptible to the impacts of air pollution. And because they're developing organs, those impacts are going to be felt throughout their life and having a permanent impact on their health. For adults, you start to see that cumulative impact of exposure to air pollution throughout their lives today. And you start to see the development of things like coronary heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, COPD, etc. And then for the older population, again, that cumulative impact is built up over a lifetime, and you start to see things like heart attack, heart failure, and strokes coming in there as well, and ultimately premature death. There are also not only inequalities throughout the life course, but inequalities elsewhere in exposure to air pollution. So we talked about pregnant women, children, and the elderly and their particular susceptibilities. But we also have those people that have got pre-existing health conditions, pre-existing cardiovascular and pre-existing respiratory disease conditions that are going to be particularly susceptible to the impacts of air pollution. And there are geographical inequalities and social inequalities too. So people that are living close to sources of air pollution, such as busy roads, are going to be exposed to more pollution than people that live further away in greener areas. And it tends to be that those areas that have got poor air quality, that are closer to busy roads, tend to be low socioeconomic status areas as well. Might be a bit small for people sitting in the audience, but we've got here the three different pollutants that I picked out here: PM2.5, PM10, and NO2, nitrogen dioxide. And we've got the WHO air quality guidelines. So all of this evidence that we have around the health impacts of air pollution has been reviewed by the World Health Organization, and they've turned that into thresholds that they say would help to protect people's health, essentially. So they've set here different thresholds. The first column here is the thresholds they set in 2005, and then in 2021 they updated it, and as you can see, they've actually slashed some of these. So PM2.5, the annual mean measured as micrograms per meter cubed, they cut in half to 5 micrograms per meter cubed. Similarly, nitrogen dioxide, they reduced that from 40 down to 10 micrograms per meter cubed. So we've seen the advice from the WHO coming through in the air quality guidelines, and then we've also got our legal thresholds as well. So our national and local air quality objectives, and those are in the last column. So for PM2.5, that was set at 20, and now we've got a new threshold for PM2.5 of 10 micrograms per meter cubed. PM10 is 40 for an annual mean, or 50 for a daily mean, and then nitrogen dioxide is 40 for an annual mean. It's worth pointing out, actually, talking about PM2.5 and the different health thresholds, there is actually no safe threshold for PM2.5. So although WHO have set 5 micrograms per meter cubed as their threshold, and we have 10 as a legal threshold, actually people that are particularly susceptible to the impacts of air pollution, they will experience that impact even at concentrations below that. So to bring it back around to Bristol, so these are the monitoring sites that Bristol City Council have in place. On the left-hand side, that's all the monitoring sites. The ones in green are the ones that are below that 40 microgram per meter cubed threshold, the legal threshold for nitrogen dioxide. And then the red ones are where it's exceeding at 40 micrograms, and the purple ones are where it's even higher, it's exceeding 50 micrograms, to give you a little bit more breakdown. All of the sites on the graph, on the map on the right-hand side, are sites that are exceeding 36 micrograms per meter cubed. So that is adding a 10% buffer to that 40 micrograms, okay? So all of these sites are essentially not good air quality, okay? So there's quite a lot of monitoring sites across the city that are exceeding that 40 micrograms per meter cubed or close to it. We also have a number of continuous monitoring sites. I should have shown you some fusion tubes, actually. The first map was looking at these sorts of things. So this is mapping diffusion tubes. These are small acrylic tubes. I shouldn't pass them around actually. I've got one here for demonstration purposes. So essentially that gets put onto a lamppost, usually 2.5 or 3 meters high, and the council will remove that cap there, and that will absorb air pollution. And they'll leave that out for a month usually, and then collect it back in, put the tube back on, and send it out to the lab. And the lab will send it back and give them the results. So that's how they manage to have such a huge number of those monitoring sites, because they're really quite cheap bits of kit, really, which they can put out and give good, relatively accurate data, but albeit on a monthly average basis. These monitoring sites are different. So these are the continuous monitoring sites. Now these look like this, okay, big green boxes. Okay, put that down there, the camera can see it too. There we go. We've got big green boxes. I've got some more pictures of these as well. But you can see these are areas around Bristol. This one is actually at Parsons Street School, as is that one. Also around, and we've got some others here as well. This one, some falls, and there's a picture of a diffusion tube in situ as well, so you can see that. Okay. Okay. So these continuous analyzers here measure lots of different pollutants, not just nitrogen dioxide. And there are actually 8 real-time, what we call real-time monitors measuring NO2. We've got 5 monitors that are measuring PM2.5 and PM10, 2 doing PM2.5, 3 doing PM10. And then we've got 1 that's measuring ground level ozone, and we've got 182 of those diffusion tubes across the city, all measuring nitrogen dioxide. Looking at some of the trends in the data, this is looking at some of the central sites in Bristol, looking at diffusion tubes. So this is looking, you can see hopefully that the trend of air pollution has been declining for quite well, for the last 10 years, slowly. And then we hit COVID and it basically fell off the cliff. So we have got that huge drop in nitrogen dioxide happening in 2020 when we had the COVID lockdowns. So not surprisingly, we started to see huge reduction in traffic related pollution because nobody was driving anywhere. What you can see after that is 2021's data, and as you can see, it started to climb up again. So although we did drop below 40 microgram per meter cubed threshold, legal threshold in 2020, many sites are now coming back up above that. These sites on Gloucester Road did drop well below and are still remaining below just about. But these sites in Parsons Street, actually, some of them didn't even manage to come below that legal threshold, even with the COVID lockdown in place, which is worrying. So just to summarise the short-term trends in air pollution, then if we look at the 2021 data, so the most recent data we have available, I haven't got the 2022 data unfortunately yet, the council is still processing that. But the 2021 data, if we compare that to the previous year, which was the COVID year, COVID lockdown year effectively, we can see that concentrations have gone up by almost 10% on average across the city. If we're comparing it to pre-COVID, we're still lower than we were pre-COVID, but I think if we looked at the 2022 data on 2021 data, we would start to see that top figure reduced or increasing, sorry, and that bottom figure reduced. So I think we would start to see, concentrations coming back up to where they were almost before COVID. Oops, gone backwards by mistake. There we go. Go the right way. Okay. And just for the sake of, well, because I had the graph, we've also got the trends for PM2.5. For the sake of completeness, that was what I was looking for. So as you can see, the PM2.5 trend has been a bit more static over the years, generally falling, but not in the same degree as the NO2. And while it's been below, or is now below, that 10 micrograms per meter cube, which was what the legal threshold now is, it's still above the WHO air quality guideline. So what has the council been doing to help to improve air quality in Bristol? So as Tim mentioned, we've got the clean air zone. I'm sure you're all familiar with the clean air zone. This was obviously introduced at the end of last November, and it charges vehicles that are older, petrol vehicles older than 2006-ish, and for diesel vehicles older than about 2015. So it charges the most polluting vehicles. And the idea is discouraging people driving into the city, because if you can't drive into the city centre, then maybe you won't drive in at all. And maybe that will help to protect some of the areas around the clean air zone as well. I know that it's faced a lot of opposition locally, not locally here necessarily, but locally within the city. A lot of people are not very happy about the clean air zone. It has affected people's lives. We can have a discussion after this, if you like, about how effective you think it might be and how much it might have affected your lives. Another project which the council has been involved in with us actually at UWE has been the Slow the Smoke project. This is not looking at road traffic, but this is looking at solid fuel burning instead, and trying to help communities that are using solid fuel to keep warm, or for quality, what's what I'm looking for here, more aesthetic reasons. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, whether it's actually to heat your homes or whether it's actually more of an aesthetic thing, to inform the public and to help people to better understand what the impacts of solid fuel burning are. So that's been a really interesting project, actually resulted in a piece of music being produced, which actually conveyed air pollution through that. There are lots of other policies that the council have also got in place at the moment. So Bristol Transport Strategy, for instance, is doing lots to try to make our transport more sustainable, to encourage people to use more active travel modes, walking and cycling, to use public transport, and to basically encourage people to leave their cars at home and to use alternative modes. But the shared mobility position statement, which is all about car clubs and using other micro mobilities such as cargo bikes and e-scooters. We've got the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which basically does what it says in the tin. And we've also got the joint local transport plans. This is working across South Gloss, Bath, North East Somerset, etc., all the surrounding authorities, because this recognises that people don't just travel within the Bristol area, they travel across this wider West of England combined authority. So this is looking at lots of different policies, looking at traffic. We've also got policies at a more of a neighbourhood level. So we've got changes that are coming through to neighbourhood roads and high streets, and these are to encourage, to make places more livable, again, to encourage people to walk and cycle more, to reduce the amount of rat running through those areas. There's a nice pilot project going on in East Bristol at the moment, which is being designed with the local community. We've got school street projects coming up, and I've seen a flyer over there about school streets. This is a national scheme, but it's helping to reduce the traffic around schools at drop-off and pick-up times to help protect children's health. We've got the e-scooters trial, which again has been very popular with young people and helping to reduce reliance on mum and dad taxis and even perhaps demand for their vehicles of their own. We've got the Metro bus, which has been a more efficient bus service to help to encourage people to use public transport. We've got the Metro West proposals, which is proposing new and old reopened stations and lines. We've got freight consolidation, which is using electric vehicles to do that last mile delivery. We've got Go Ultra Low West, which is putting in more electric charging points for public vehicles. And then we've got overlap with climate policy as well, recognising that you are a climate action group. There's a lot of overlap with climate policy because generally we're talking about the same sources. When we talk about traffic, reducing CO2 emissions from traffic, we're talking about reducing nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter emissions from traffic. So lots of similar strategies have overlap there. Few links on the last slide just to kind of give you a little bit of an opportunity to find more information. There's lots of information out there, and lots of information about clean air in Bristol, including the clean air zone. If you want to find information about the monitoring data, that's all publicly available. And if you want to find out a little bit more context about what the council are doing as well, the air quality reports, which they report to DEFRA annually, and their action plan will also be available on that website there. And finally, as Tim mentioned, it is Clean Air Day tomorrow. So just a final plug there to say it's Clean Air Day. And if there's anything you would like to pledge to do tomorrow to help to improve air quality, that'd be great. Okay, thank you very much. Well over time there in the event, sorry.
Well, thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
We need to know, can you load the next?
Excellent. We do question and answers after.
Together, yes. Okay, if you've got any questions, try and hold on to them, because we've got a shorter presentation from Ben now about a more specific issue. But from what Joe has said, it's clear that doing something about air quality certainly includes the clean air zone, which is about vehicle traffic and is perhaps the biggest single initiative, but there are so many other things that are involved as well. Most of them have some controversy related to them, I have to say. But from listening to that myself, I don't think I personally would say there was a lack of widespread effort in trying to deal with air quality. It's a question of how effective it is and how much indeed it is accepted by people whose lives it is affecting. And it really does come close to home. And the next presentation from Dr. Ben Williams, who is a senior research fellow at UE in the same centre that Joe works in. Ben has 15 years experience, and he's going to talk to you about a research project which is taking place at the moment in Bristol and also I believe in Leeds as well. And this is looking at the issue of microplastics, which we haven't talked about, but this is another source of air pollution. And Ben is particularly interested in environmental sampling, monitoring networks. He's been a consultant to the Environment Agency in England and is the principal investigator for this particular project, which is called Homes Under the Microscope, isn't it? That's right. And that's funded by the UK Centre Research and Innovation Funding Project. Okay. So we hand over to you now. Thank you very much. And hold on to those questions. We'll be time for them all.
Thank you very much. Yes, and as you said, very grateful for the opportunity to speak today. And if you need me to speak up, please tell me to. I often do come across quite quietly. So give me a kick if I'm too quiet. So yeah, this is talking about airborne microplastics, which is a topic that might not have crossed your path before. We hear about microplastics in the marine environment and in rivers, etc. But we might have a problem with microplastics in the air. So firstly, can I just ask you, just do a little bit of mindfulness here? Is you have a pause and have a look around and think about the materials that you're wearing. Think about what you're sitting on, what the floor is made from, what other surfaces are made from in here. And how robust is that material, do you think? Do you think it's something that easily flakes, easily sheds, easily falls apart? Keep that in mind as we go through this. So to define microplastics, it's any fragment less than 5 millimeters in diameter. People have been finding microplastics in places that we would not expect them to. So in snowpacks in the Arctic. So people would be out sampling in the Arctic and they'll be sampling for snow in the middle of nowhere and there'll be microplastics in it. People have found them in the Alps and in the Pyrenees. So in pristine environments, the tops of mountains, they've been sampling for other things and microplastics are present. If we think about, as Joe was talking about, PM10 and PM2.5, those are size fractions. So they define particles by their size, and that is it. They could be composed of anything, even microplastics. And we know from some research that microplastics and microrubbers, particularly from car tires, are a significant contributor to the environment. There's a lot of particles of microrubbers and microplastics being released from cars and other vehicles. Studies have found microplastics in all parts of the lung, which again is an interesting finding, and in other parts of the body as well. And from a climate perspective, they're thought to contribute a small amount to the radiative forcing as well. And that might be to do with the color of those particles as well. So microplastics, they're essentially everywhere. So what we wanted to do was to explore microplastics in somewhere that we can spend our time. We spend most of our time indoors. So what are the concentrations of microplastics in our homes? Now, this project started right in the middle of the pandemic. We didn't know whether we were coming out of lockdown. We didn't know what was going to happen. And to be able to sample in people's homes in that type of environment, we want to need people to participate. And that really enabled us to develop a really nice participatory research method here. So the aim of Homes Under the Microscope was to facilitate, through a co-creation with citizens, an investigation of airborne microplastics in the home. So it's not someone going, here we are, here's a sampler, gather some stuff, give us some data. What we wanted to do was to create the sampling process with participants as well, to make it an inclusive and accessible approach. As it says there in the objectives, we wanted to design and refine a simple microplastic sampling technique. It might look simple, but it was difficult to pull together. And then to collect those samples as well. And to do that, from past experience of projects, we want to do that in a phased approach. So with a lot of participatory research, you have people with different levels of engagement. Some people are incredibly enthusiastic and will stick with the process right from start to finish. Others, for a whole host of reasons, that could be because they don't have the time, they've lost interest, they might just want to participate in a small part of it. So we wanted to design a project that could bring both of those groups of people together. So the phase 1 pilot, which is in Bristol, was the really high engagement participants who tested lots of microscopes, lots of methods, did lots of sampling for us, to then refine the method to allow those who want less engagement, to want that dip in and dip out engagement, to participate as well. We wanted to really try and engage with as many as possible and reduce as many barriers as we could. And that wider rollout was in Bristol and Bradford as well. And essentially the sampling mechanism is, you have some sticky tape, you have a Petri dish, you leave it out for 2 weeks, put the lid on, after you've taken the picture with your phone and a little microscope that we'd share with you. You'd upload your picture to a platform that some colleagues have developed, and you'd send the Petri dish back to us. Really that simple. Petri dish out, take a picture, lid on, off it goes. In terms of the online analysis tool, I'm just going to demonstrate to you the mechanism by which a colleague has designed this, which is really interesting. If it worked on this, it might not let me because of the way we're presenting. But essentially, someone would upload a slide, you'd click run, and what it would do is segment the particles and the sample. So it'd tell you how many fibers there are, how many particles there are, what colors they are, etc. And are we able to share these slides beyond here? Because then you might be able to access the clickable bits.
Yes, we do.
In terms of our pilot results, it was really interesting. So again, with participatory research, you often don't get many people following the whole process through. So we had 37 out of 40 people follow the process right the way through. With over 200 samples returned, 11 different room types sampled, 324 images uploaded, and some of the rooms that people are sampling in was bedrooms, bathrooms, dining rooms, kitchens, etc. Getting a really nice overview of the different types of concentrations across people's homes. Now this looks like a small number. So what we found was there were 3 on average fibers per centimetre squared in people's homes. So that's per centimetre squared. So that is very small area. So if you multiply that up, you're talking into meters squared, into the tens of thousands of fibers per meter squared in people's homes on average. Lowest count, 1 per centimeter squared, highest count, 7 per centimeter squared. Bedrooms have the most fibers, followed by bathrooms. Now, we were trying to understand why bedrooms in particular, but then I started to think about, or we started to think about what activities in bedrooms might release lots of fibers. And one is changing beds. So when you change the bed, you'll take the duvet off, you put a new duvet on. So there's lots of releasing mechanical action there. And you're shaking the bed to get the blanket over the duvet, which is an absolute nightmare. And it takes me a quarter of an hour every time I do it. But you can see a lot of release from that as well. So that could be a reason why bedrooms in particular are, it might be that we could change our bedrooms as well. And just to show you a distribution by room, for example, we have the bedroom on the left, then the bathroom and the lounge, kitchen, and then other rooms as well. But the largest range of samples seem to be in the bedroom. Often on days like this and evenings like this, if you've got a window that you can see the last shining light coming through the window at this time of night as the sun's setting, wherever you are in your house, you start to see particles moving through that shaft of light. Another act of mindfulness is to try and focus in on those particles. Think about the shapes and the colors and the sizes of those things that you see go past, and you'll start to realize those are probably a mixture of plastic and natural fibers. So in terms of our samples, polyester was the most common type of plastic. Cellulose was the most common type of natural fiber. Cellulose as a natural fiber in inverted commas, because that can be heavily processed to make different materials. And of the fibers tested, 41% of microplastics, 55% were, in inverted commas, natural fibers as well, and there were another grouping that were unclassified. So whilst we are interested, and the project started off looking at microplastics in the air, what we realized that we needed to think about was microfibers in the air. This is in line with some other studies. So some studies in other parts of the biosphere, so in the marine environment, have looked at microplastics. So a paper that came out recently off the east coast of Africa found breakdowns similar to what we found here. Some other studies finding microplastics in human hair. Obviously, you're not going to find much in mine, but they were finding mostly natural fibers there again. So we're on the same path. And then just to touch on how co-creation really shaped the project, citizens allowed us to identify which microscope was the best from a range of microscopes, allowed us to improve the instructions, simplified the results in the analysis tool, etc. Identified specifically which rooms to focus our sampling in, how long to sample for, and then to improve the algorithm of that analysis tool as well. So just to wrap up really quickly, microplastics really do abound across the biosphere. They're found everywhere in all mediums that we sample. It's really hard to have a clean sample, even in the lab. Homes are a significant source and sink of microplastics, with bedrooms with the highest concentrations. We shouldn't forget those other sources. So fragmentation of much bigger particles. I've got a bit of plastic rope here, particularly through environmental degradation and tires, etc. And we collectively, working together, can play a really significant role in understanding how we develop methods, generate data, etc. And thinking about microplastics from car tires, is it actually time to reinvent the wheel? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ben. Now, time for questions, time for discussion, personal experience.